Hello everyone and welcome back. Happy Sunday. It's Sunday early morning for me. It's probably going to be Sunday evening for you by the time you see this video. Most of the time, now that I'm working largely in solitude on everyone's bikes, I think about during the course of the day the comments that I receive on videos, the common questions that I get, and quite frankly, you guys are the primary focus and the basis for the topics on all of my videos. I review your comments, I think about them, and I try to bring content to you guys that answers most of your questions on your videos. As you can see, there's a primary behind me on a late model FL. And quite often I get comments on why I choose the certain components that I do choose when it comes to doing a build. It depends on several things. You guys may have seen my videos in the past on the top 5 things you need to consider when planning the budget for your build, but sometimes those recommendations get more technical and people ask me, why did you choose this for me? So today we're going to talk about just primary components, what they've done for me, how they work, and quite frankly, why I choose the different components that I choose potentially for your build referencing this specific bike. So if you're interested, hang in there with us. This build in particular is going to be a 124. This bike is primarily used for touring, carrying a passenger, things like that. It's not something that's going to be drag raced. The engine that I'm building for it is essentially a 3,000 RPM riding average. Occasional aggressive roll-ons, leaving a red light, that sort of thing. But it's the primary focus again was long distance touring reliability. That's the focus, and that's what we have to consider. Is it the most powerful engine we could build? Absolutely not. Will it be incredibly respectful and quite surprising to its owner? Yes, of course it will be, but we have to think of intended purpose here. Now, that's kind of gives you an idea of the build, and as far as the transmission is concerned, of course you can't see the other side. This one is equipped with a DD7. Now, let's go through the parts list of what I've chosen for this primary to recommend to this customer. And the only reasons for my recommendation is based off of the feedback, information, riding style, those 5 things that matter that have virtually nothing to do with me. All of those things combined is what pointed me in the direction to make recommendations to this particular owner. So what you see is an American Prime clutch, you see a Trask clutch basket, you see a Dark Horse Man of War motor sprocket, and you see a Baker tensioner. Those are the components that are there. So let's talk why I chose each of these components for this particular customer. Now, let's, you know what, let's handle them one at a time. Let's talk about the pros and the cons, if you will. So in this particular one, I chose an American Prime clutch. You guys have heard me say over and over again, I don't believe that there's necessarily a best of anything. You guys rely on me to be straight up with you and cut through the marketing bullcrap, and so that's what I'm going to do. And the truth of it is, if there was a best of any particular one thing, that would be the only thing that people would buy. So the way that I prefer to look at it is what is the best for its particular application. And in this case, an American Prime clutch is a wonderful, wonderful fit. Now, Evolution Industries, I'm also a big fan of Evolution, and there are other companies that make good clutches out there, like Barnett and such. And but in this case, one of the things, some of the things that I like about the American Prime clutch, number one, it still maintains a diaphragm spring. Now, largely the reason I choose this is based off of consumer feedback. And one of the characteristics and benefits of a diaphragm spring is that you have a very broad friction zone, if you will. You have, and when you get close to the grip with the lever, it almost feels like as if it snaps over center, and the clutch lever effort is reduced as you get almost all the way to the lever, of course, depending on how you adjust the clutch. So it's very friendly in high traffic environments. All right, and that's one of the reasons I like a diaphragm spring. It gives you a very confident feel in that traffic, and it also makes it very predictable. Now, in a coil spring type setup, it's almost a consistent pull all the way through. Some people prefer that. Some people find that the strength in their wrist may not be suitable for that, or maybe they spend a lot of time in traffic and that consistent pull all the way through, the lever pull, doesn't quite suit their needs. So the spring is a great choice. The diaphragm spring is a great choice in those environments. And of course, through American Prime, it's available with a black spring being the lightest, a silver spring being middle of the road, and then a gold spring, which you kind of got to be a gorilla to pull that bad boy, but there's options for that as well. And then when you get into the diaphragm springs, the coil springs, that tends to be more for your very aggressive clutches, but that's probably for another video. There's two other reasons why I like to go with American Prime, is that they come with shims, spacers essentially, that allows you the opportunity to shim this pressure plate in and out. And that not only changes that breakover point of the spring, how hard it bites, but it also gives you the opportunity to adjust the pressure plate position and stack height of the total clutch based on clutch wear. So clutch plates, yes, they do wear over time, and the fact that they can be shimmed in and out can compensate for that wear. Another aspect of why I like these clutches is that the replacement plates and steels are very economically priced. Now, if you look at clutches of other brands, you may find, and I encourage you to look at this, you may find that their replacement plates and steels are rather expensive. In some cases, 2 to 3 times more expensive than what a replacement fiber and plate setup is for an American Prime. Now, that being said, I have never replaced one of these clutches due to a mechanical defect. Not one. And I can only think of, it's got to be less than a dozen times with all the clutches that we install that I've had to order replacement plates and fibers for someone because they wore them out. Excuse me. That being said, it's a very logical choice for a lot of my customers that are doing touring and things like that. And one of their goals is to achieve very long-term success rates with all the components they've chosen, and to try to reduce cost of ownership as much as possible. That makes this a very good choice. Now let's move to the clutch basket itself. As you can see, this is a Trask basket, and I also use a lot of full basket assemblies from Evolution Industries, and typically on the earlier model bikes, because, pre-07, Trask doesn't make a basket for that. That's one aspect. But aside from that, Evolution Industries is another one of those companies that makes absolutely outstanding products. And so when it's an ultra high horsepower engine, like for example on my ProCharger FXR with the nitrous, that's tapping in a 300 horsepower mark, that has a complete Evolution Industries clutch assembly in it. Basket, ring gear, the whole deal, the clutch and everything, and it's a coil spring clutch. Now, yes, it's also hydraulic. Now, did I give up some of the benefits of the diaphragm spring by going with a coil spring clutch on my own bike? Yes, I did. However, we have to consider the intended purpose and the power output. That being said, most of the time, I recommend a Trask basket. It's rather economical in consideration of other options that are out there, and the reality of it is I have never had a failure with a Trask clutch basket. Not one. It really falls in line with what we see on the American Prime clutches. Again, they've proven themselves to be rock solid. Yes, you have to do a little bit of machining and drilling and such. You can see my other videos on how to install one of these things. You have to remove the rivets and attach it to your original back plate and all that type of stuff. But so sometimes, depending on the level of your build, that if you aren't able to do those things yourself, sometimes the cost of paying someone to do that little bit of machining type work may offset the cost of an entirely new basket. And if you were in that situation, I may recommend an entire Evolution Industries assembly, because in the end, you kind of spend the same. But on the back side, going with the Evolution Industries deal, you also get a new starter ring gear, backplate, everything as a total assembly. So it really varies, and that's why I like to sell parts, and the reason I don't have a bunch of stuff on my website is because I'm that custom tailored suit kind of guy. Sometimes the other option is a better fit, but in this case, the bike is here, we're doing everything, so it's quite simple for me to do that, and it was a great economical choice for this bike's intended purpose. Now, let's move to the primary chain tensioner. In this unit, I have a Baker unit. As you guys know, I have a very, very long history with Baker. And so not only do I install these, I install a lot of the Hayden tensioners. Let me wipe the sweat off my brow. It's a little warm here, and I don't want anybody to complain about fan noise in the background. So I'm going to sweat for a minute. You guys know I've installed a lot of Hayden tensioners as well. And truth of the matter is, I personally have not had an issue with the Baker tensioner or the Hayden tensioner. Haven't had an issue with any one of them. I haven't, in all the years I've put them in, I haven't had a customer complain that theirs broke, etc. Now, on the Baker side, some would say that their shoe broke prematurely. In the original design, where all of this was... Let's stop that for a second. That was the fire department chiming in. I don't know if you guys heard that or not, but it wasn't me, so we'll keep going. In this case, this is one of the cast pieces. When they first started making the tensioner way back in the day, they were billet pieces, and then they made some changes again. They went to a cast piece, and then they went to adding this outer support, and there have been several modifications and changes of the Baker tensioner since. And then, of course, the Hayden, and then there's another company, Southern Oregon Hot Bikes, that makes a hydraulic version of a tensioner, and I've chosen to focus on two, which was the one from Baker or the one from Hayden. And in reality, again, I haven't had an issue with either one of them, and I see pros and cons of each, which I'll go into in just a second. One of the things, the Baker tensioner, I believe, is tapping out at about $300 retail, where the Hayden tensioner is hovering at around $150, $160 retail, I believe. So there's a big cost difference there. Now, one of the things about the Baker unit, yes, it's very rigid, and it is exactly like your original full manual chain adjusters in that you set it and it's there. And then I typically recommend to folks roughly every 10,000 miles to go in and check the chain adjustment. There is a reason this primary chain is at 1/2 of an inch, not the 5 to 7/8 like the original factory recommended on manual tensioners. I'll get to that in a second, but there's 1/2 an inch of free play that's here. So with the since 07, when they went to the factory auto adjusting ratcheting style tensioners, as you guys know, there's no window in here to make it easily accessible. So then that means that with the Baker tensioner, once you start hearing a tapping noise, and I'll describe that for a second, if you look right here, the boss on this bolt right here that goes through the primary, typically what will happen if there's too much slack in this area here, the chain will bounce and hit on this spot right here, and it sounds like somebody's tapping it with a screwdriver. Okay, so that being said, with the Baker tensioner, it is fully 100% manual. I've adjusted it to 1/2 inch because of this up here, which I'll get to in a second. So once you set it, that's it. So you almost have to kind of sit back and wait until you start hearing that tapping noise in the primary, almost like somebody is in there with a screwdriver tapping the cover, which is the chain hitting down here to indicate to you that you should probably go in and check this. Another reason to do that is if you're having a bit of a clunk when you're shifting from neutral to first, or if you're having a hard time finding neutral. Sometimes it's because there's too much slack in your chain, or it could be because the chain is too tight. Regardless, that's one of the drawbacks behind the Baker, is that you set it and that is it. But you also have no window in your outer primary that makes it easy to check and adjust. So then that leads me to the Hayden unit, which is very similar in that you would set it to this point. But it also comes with shims, and the actual shoe itself is spring-loaded. So there's a bit of an automatic tension to that that keeps the chain from oscillating and bouncing around up and down, but it also provides for some self-adjustment that over time could reduce the chance that you need to pull your primary cover to go in and make the adjustment, again, because you don't have the window. So for folks that tend to be more on the side of they like to wrench on their own bike, and maybe they're obsessive compulsive like me, and they're going to pull that primary every 5,000 miles and look and check. For that guy, I wouldn't hesitate for a second to put the Baker unit in, because I know he's going to go in and check this slack. For the guy that is putting down a lot of mileage and doing a lot of touring, he may find himself, I don't know, halfway across the country needing an oil change, and he doesn't want to go through the expense of pulling his primary to check this. That's the fellow that I would probably recommend using the Hayden unit. Both are good units. I've never had a failure with either one. One is twice the price of the other. So largely I leave it up to my customers to choose after I've given them all of this information. So that covers that. Now let's get to the motor sprocket. Okay, there are companies out there that are making billet ramp assemblies, you retaining your factory diaphragm springs that are in and your factory, that portion of the factory compensator, changing the ramp. And then there's another company, a small company, that's making different diaphragm springs and such. And so there, like anything else in this business, there's a ton of different options. So in this particular case, as you can see, we went with the Man of War motor sprocket. There's several things I like about this thing. First off, it's really, I almost want to say no, it's a non-mechanical device, as crazy as that sounds. There's really only a couple of pieces. You have the sprocket and the hub, and it's cushioned by, you can't see them here because I've already assembled it, by Viton cushions, and you have a couple of choices of different densities, one that's more firm and one that's a little softer. Fact is, I'm seeing guys going extremely long mileages, 30, 40, 50 plus thousand miles, without changing those cushions. And in the event you ever wore a cushion out, that toolkit and cushion kit is exceptionally inexpensive and allows you to turn your motor sprocket back to its original state. That is absolutely wonderful. Because it is a very simple mechanical device, having just a hub and just the outer, there are less parts that can fail. So the big pro to the Man of War motor sprocket, in my opinion, is that it is the perfect blend between a solid front sprocket, giving you the advantages of less rotational mass, a better throttle response, and all of those things. But it also has some of the qualities of a compensating sprocket in that it can absorb some of the shock. So if I had to say, you know, a solid motor sprocket in a typical touring environment, I'm not a fan of. But in a racing environment with a belt drive, that's a different deal. Another video, I did one on it a while back. Or a full compensator, this is the perfect blend of the two, and that's why I like it. Now, I would have to admit, 1 out of every maybe 10 or 15 customers, it's not a lot of folks, 1 out of every 10 or so may complain of when they install this, it making a noise. The reality is, this device and the way that it's made, it's virtually impossible for this thing itself to create the noise. When you put it in, could it create excessive noise in the primary? Yes, but it's not necessarily being generated by here. It is only making it more prevalent or more obvious. In most of my testing, what I discovered was that a lot of the noise has to do with the dog rings and the dogs and the gears in the factory 6-speed transmission. And if you look back, you can Google it. If you look back and look up neutral rattle in 2011, I believe it was, 13 years ago, there was a tech service bulletin released to dealers to explain to customers that if they heard a rattle in neutral, the neutral rattle, if you heard that it wasn't a mechanical concern, that in fact it was just a nuance and not a mechanical issue. Well, I can't necessarily agree that it's not a mechanical issue, but that being said, there's several factors we have to consider. If this creates a little bit of a noisy primary in neutral, well, you're not in neutral that often. You don't ride your bike in neutral. So there's a couple of things to consider. One, it could be an indication, an early indication that you may have a typically it's third gear failure in your factory transmission, where the dog rings have a little slack in them and they're rattling around in neutral, or maybe you have a secondary shaft bearing problem or something like that. So in other words, this could make potentially tell you, be an early alarm, if you will, if you have a neutral rattle, that you may have a transmission problem in the future. But in any event, this is a great option for most folks, and the reason I use it primarily is one, it is that perfect blend. It gives that perfect throttle response, and it reduces the potential of future service requirements or expense. So if the individual that owns this bike, he plans on putting 100,000+ miles on it, riding it across country and all those things, I don't want him to have to go in and replace ramps and springs and all that stuff later on down the road. And if he did have to go back into this for whatever reason, then he could buy a kit for a very, very reasonable price. I think they're about $100 give or take. And with removing the primary cover and about 10 minutes, he could replace those cushions himself and be right back on the road. So it's a very easy product to maintain overall. It's solid and it works. And of course, I communicate to everyone, there is a possibility that when I install this thing, that you may find you have a little bit of a neutral rattle. And that being said, if they know everything else is mechanically good in there, that rattle creates no concern because they don't ride their bike in neutral. But there's other things we have to consider as well. There are other parts we have upgraded in this primary as well. A billet clutch basket can transmit noise a little differently or resonate a little differently than what a cast basket would. We also have a heavy duty clutch and spring. We have a lot of hot rod parts in here, and we've now also went to a mechanical tensioner, and you can hear the plates in that basket, and I'm just tapping on it. Sometimes when you start incrementally adding things, not too much different than stack tolerances when I machine it and blueprint an engine, sometimes these stack differences can elevate noise, and it's hard to point as to which one actually caused it. But there we go. Now, one of the reasons that I have this adjusted to 1/2 inch instead of 5/8 to 7/8, as was recommended on factory manual tensioners from 06 and back, is based on a recommendation from Dark Horse and also my personal findings. And really what I found, because of, again, this boss right here, as this heats up, the possibility that this chain can have just enough slack on an engine pulse to tap that bolt boss right there. 1/2 inch is a good place to be in these with their compensator to keep it from touching there. The other thing I found is it gives you longer, 10 to maybe 15 or even 20,000 miles or more before you have to go back in and adjust these manual tensioners. Also, after looking at it and tearing some down, I found that on this late model setup with all these precision parts in there and a straight crank and a straight main shaft in your transmission, you don't see as much oscillation of the primary chain you would see with completely stock components. A stock crank with potentially 10-12 thousandths plus sprocket shaft runout, 10, 15, 20 thousandths plus main shaft runout on your transmission. We don't see that when we're upgrading everything. That being said, it affords me the opportunity to run a slightly tighter chain here and it not have an adverse effect on the main drive gear bearing in the transmission or the crank bearing in the engine. Add to that, the main drive gear bearing in the transmission has also been upgraded to a tapered main, and it has a perfect clearance of 1 to 1.5 thousandths of an inch in place. So I know that thing is rock solid and better than the roller that's stock. And also on most twin cam and M8 applications, not all of them for various different reasons, most of the time there's a tapered main bearing up front there as well. So we've got shafts that are more rigid and in a better place. So anyway, all of that being said, I'm loyal to a lot of brands. But my biggest goal is to make sure and understand what your needs are. That's why I don't put a bunch of parts on my website. I can get parts from everybody and ship parts to anybody, but I want to talk to people first. I want to know and understand your needs, your requirements, how you're going to use the bike, and make sure you're armed with all the information that you need to make the best buying decision that you can make. I don't want to tell you what to buy. I feel like my job is to tell you all the information I have available, my experience, the pros and the cons, and let you make the best decision. And then I make the best recommendation I can based off all the information you've given me, and that's what this is all about. So I hope this video helps you guys see and understand why on this particular bike I chose the components I did, why I choose it on other bikes, and you know, if I build a bike for you or you call and order parts for me, I may recommend different parts. And quite frankly, it's because of you. What you tell me, your needs, your desires, your right hand, and various other factors. Guys, I hope you have a great week this week. I'm going to get back to work and move on and build some more primaries. And then over the next, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, I'm going to be putting on top ends and putting on heads for all these folks that have been waiting for forever. And then I'm going to be tuning bikes and all this other stuff and rolling them through and rocking and rolling. So a lot of good videos coming. Thank you guys so much for your support. Love you guys. I appreciate you. Stay strong. Ride your motorcycle. Be proud of who you are, what you do, and remember why you love what you do. It's a wonderful thing. Love why we ride. Love why we do what we do. Take care of yourselves and each other. You guys have a good one. See ya.